Leah, can you believe it? It's already the start of season 2 of Rock That Doesn't Roll.
Yes, I am so excited about this season.
If you remember, the last episode we did on season 1 was my favorite musician, David Bazan of Pedro the Lion.
Yes.
And today, it's only fair that you get a turn to feel what I felt.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Knapp.
Here's why I'm excited about speaking with Jennifer Knapp. First off, when I was in college, one of my roommates brought her CD home. And at that time, I think I've shared, I didn't grow up with a lot of the CCM pop music in my house. But I was a young woman of the 90s, so I had a taste for singer-songwriters like Alanis Morissette and Sarah McLachlan and Natalie Merchant. And when my roommate brought home a Jennifer Knapp CD, we were all hooked. We absolutely loved it. Did not believe it was Christian music.
Wait, why didn't you think it was Christian music when you heard it? Like, what was the thing?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be feminism. In the 90s, there was a marketing trend to sell music that was empowering to young women, but also the audience for contemporary Christian music, the primarily suburban white evangelical moms, had a negative connotation associated with the word feminism. So there was music that was intended to empower, but this was in the era when Rush Limbaugh was calling feminists feminazis and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. But I remember she was super popular. Like, I was a freshman in college when her album Kansas came out and was everywhere. They had this poster of her from the album cover. I feel like anytime I was in a girl's dorm room, there was a really good chance that was going to be on the wall.
Wow, yes, absolutely.
A picture of Jennifer Knapp, black and white. In that world, she had this level of fame that is like the dream for so many of these Christian artists.
I agree. She was iconic. And then in 2004, she gave a magazine interview where she just said she was taking a break from music and that she was going to leave her future in God's hands. And then she just moved to Australia.
After all of that, it leaves us with the question, what the hell happened? From PRX and the Big Questions Project, this is Rock That Doesn't Roll. I'm Andrew Gill, a music journalist raised on Christian rock.
And I'm Leah Payne, a religious historian and author of the book God Gave Rock and Roll to You. In each episode, we look at how Christian music shaped the world we're living in now by focusing on one aspect of that world.
Today on the show, we're telling Jennifer Knapp's story and asking, what happens when the poster child breaks the frame that the Christian music industry put around female stars? Would it be possible to make faith-based art as a feminist?
My career as a musician started around 3rd or 4th grade as a profoundly talented recorder player.
After mastering recorder, Jennifer actually went on to trumpet, and she went to college to study it. She was never intending to become a rock star. She was planning to pursue music education. She just picked up a guitar as a kind of hobby.
I made a decision to become a Christian in like my early 20s. It was a little bit of a slow burn, but I was evangelized to by a lot of my Christian friends, and I was going through an extremely rough patch.
Unlike a lot of 1990s CCM stars, Jennifer Knapp didn't actually grow up in an evangelical community.
I had no idea about Christian culture, that there was this culture with a capital C.
She was a young adult in college when she became an evangelical Christian, and she had no concept of the expectations that evangelical culture put on women.
I had no idea you went to church on any day but Sunday at 1 hour a week. It was a 1 hour commitment that I thought that was going to add a little illumination to my life. It turns out there's so much more to it.
Little did she know at the time, but Jennifer's conversion was straight out of a ministry textbook. This is how evangelism was supposed to work. A sinner turns their life around to follow Jesus.
I mean, there was something really appealing to me about the redemptive story of Christianity, and I think at the same time, the liberation, the concept of a life that you didn't have to be ashamed of, a life that you were happy in yourself and in your person. And I think that the thing that definitely attracted me to Christianity was this notion that God could look at me and love me in this no holds barred kind of way when I couldn't see myself that way.
As a Christian, Jennifer felt even closer to her Christian friends who had been directly a part of her conversion. But soon they had some suggestions for her.
I never aspired to be a performer or musician, but I would sit around with my friends. I'd grab my acoustic guitar and I'd play a couple cover songs. And I would play Tracy Chapman or Cowboy Junkies, or I remember noodling around with some Indigo Girls. Closer I am to find, yeah. Closer I am to find, yeah. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I'm just playing songs that I liked. And my Christian friends were like, now that you're a Christian, instead of listening to this secular music, which is the first time I'd ever heard any of my music that I listened to or enjoyed referred to in that manner, you need to listen to Christian music, songs about God. You can't listen to any of this other stuff.
But it wasn't just negative messages her friends shared. Yes, they thought she should cut out secular music, but they also thought Jennifer could write her own songs.
It just had never occurred to me to be able to take what I was learning in my faith life and to spend time writing it.
Without these friends and this moment, Jennifer's career could have taken a completely different trajectory.
That was kind of like one of those culture clash moments where it was very much decided, at least at the time, that you couldn't have both. It had to be all leading toward this discipleship kind of idea about your life. And I think I took that seriously. It ended up, being something that I spent quite a lot of time doing. My friends very much enjoyed the music that I was creating.
And Jennifer very much enjoyed discovering the world of CCM artists that she'd never been aware of before.
I came across artists like Margaret Becker, who was another chick with guitar, which, if you know anything about contemporary Christian music, they're kind of rare, as chicks with guitars.
Calling too deep, calling too deep, calling deep.
Ashley Cleveland, another female acoustic player. I loved Out of the Gray and Susan Ashton and all the great songwriting from Wayne Kirkpatrick, which I was absolutely in love with, would leave me in tears.
It's hard to tell just when the night becomes the day, that golden moment when the darkness rolls away.
Oh, and I should say a lot of the West Coast stuff, like the 77s, Dakota Motor Company.
Most of all, you remind me of the sun, shining your light on me and everyone.
And I was doing a lot of coffee houses in the Midwest, so groups like Sixpence None the Richer were coming through, and I was getting chances as an amateur to open up in and around those guys.
So let's dance again in this field of flowers.
I was like, oh, this makes sense to me. A lot of those artists, I would say to me, weren't trying to be something else. They were telling the story when and where they were at. And I thought, oh, I can do that.
I have a question about your first song, what it was like to write a song that was in conversation with those new friends and what it was like to perform that.
Oh, it would have been bad. One of the earliest songs I can remember, it was a song called Shine. I did a recording of it and a music video that went along with it that we made. It was kind of fun, where I was working at Hardee's and flipping burgers in the video, just hardworking girl, just trying to get right with the Lord. I think the chorus was something like, shine on me, once a slave to sin, but now your blood has set me free. Oh, I hear that now and I cringe. And even at the time I cringed. Like, it was not the way that I wanted to write.
At this point, Jennifer had only been a Christian for like a year, and her Christian friends were cajoling her into writing songs about faith. So it makes sense that her first attempts would emulate the language and expectations of the people around her.
And the result of doing that was a challenge to me that I think inevitably led me to a path of actually challenging me as a songwriter, because the only people I could sing that song to were the people in my circle of Christian culture. To go home and play that to my family, to go out to a pub or a bar or a street corner or anywhere else in the world to play that song would have just seemed as cheesy as it felt to me. And so the challenge of that really, I think, inspired me to kind of try and find a way to communicate something that actually really did mean a lot to me.
Just when I think I got it, it's gone.
Even though Jennifer isn't proud of her earliest songs, her Christian friends kept encouraging her to make more music, and they spread the good news about Jennifer Knapp to anyone who would listen.
It really was my friends that were pushing me in that direction. I mean, I didn't have these designs of signing to a Christian music label, and at the same time, it's worth saying that because I was this convert to Christianity and then had an ability to speak about it in a particular way that was moving to others who understood this tradition, that, you know, I was somewhat of the poster child in this little space. Is like, oh, look at this sinner turned saint. This is an amazing conversion experience. You know, tell us your testimony and tell us all about the bad things so we can see how good you are now. And even that was just like, I don't know if I really want to market myself in that way. There's more to me than that story.
For a few years, Jennifer played small gigs at colleges, maybe a church, a coffee shop, playing for 100 or 200 people at the most.
They're really small. They're really social, and we're in close proximity to one another. So in that sense, there is more pressure in some ways to kind of fit in. But because it's not seen on this global scale, because it is in the room on that day, so you have this luxury, strangely enough, to really connect to people and say something that's really authentic.
Later on, Jennifer would look back on these days with fondness, when her fan base was exponentially larger, but somehow she felt more alone. If it hadn't been for her manager, Byron Funk, she probably wouldn't have done any of it. Her career only built momentum because it was propelled by the enthusiasm of friends like Byron.
He was sending those recordings that we did to record labels and showing them my schedule and showing them that I was really actually building a community of people throughout the Midwest. I didn't really know that Byron was doing this initially. One day he's like, you know, we've got a couple of people who are really interested in meeting you and signing with a record deal. And I was like, dude, what are you doing, man? I don't even know if I want to do that.
One of those tapes had found its way to Goatee Records, the label founded in 1994 by Toby Mac, the rapper in DC Talk.
Byron, I think, knew somebody who knew Toby McKeon. They're like, yeah, here's some tickets to the backstage. You're going to meet DC Talk. And all my friends are freaking out. And I'm like, who's Toby McKeon? I didn't know. But, you know, I didn't mean that in a bad way. I didn't have my finger on the pulse of what was happening in CCM at the time. So
you were secretly still listening to Indigo Girls and Tracy Chapman.
A lot, yeah. A lot, yeah.
On paper, Jennifer Knapp, Toby Mac, and DC Talk don't seem to have much in common. But Toby Mac wasn't just an artist. He was a businessman with a keen eye for what kinds of music would appeal to CCM audiences. And in some ways, DC Talk's 1995 blockbuster, Jesus Freak, cleared the way for more individual expression in the mainstream Christian music industry.
When the Jesus Freak record came out, it absolutely changed the landscape of CCM. It gave permission to the rest of CCM to kind of, you know, put some holes in their jeans and go to church in military boots. And it really gave permission to those of us to go, oh, the rocking thing that I'm doing is okay. Toby was an intriguing person to me because he was a signed artist. I mean, he was eating sushi in the green room and getting ready to go on stage and putting on belt packs with wireless microphones. And I'm like, wow, this is like rock and roll, man.
Here we go! Right now is the time that you gotta get with it. The gift that he's given ain't just an exhibit, but a tool that he's given us to use for his sake. And just as he's given, he can surely take.
I probably only had a dozen songs that I'd written at that point. I think it was around 94, 95, somewhere in there. So I signed with only enough songs to do the first record. I think one of the reasons why I signed is I figured I wanted to live in the moment. You know, you don't get a lot of opportunities like that. And as I told my mom when I dropped out of school to go do my first tour, I said, well, you know, I'll be back next semester.
So Jennifer has a record deal and a debut album, Kansas, on Goatee Records. They're printing thousands of posters with the album cover. But beyond that, she has no idea what lies ahead. And that in just a few years, everything she thought she knew about herself would be in question.
Coming up, Jennifer finds herself sharing the stage with her musical heroes.
Female recording artists and touring artists that you're going to write down in the names of history that people aren't going to forget, and my name's in the middle of that, and that was a pretty big honor.
Rock that doesn't roll.
Before that record came out, did they ever, like, I've heard about, like, Motown would send artists to, like, a finishing school or something. Did they ever send you to, like, you know, CCM celebrity finishing school or anything like that? Or, like,
Oh, how I wish they had.
Oh my gosh, wait a minute. If you were to have given yourself a class on like CCM finishing school, what would you have told your early 20s self about like how to comport yourself?
You know, I don't know that I would tell myself that much different. One of the things I love actually about my naivete and my ignorance of CCM was that I walked into every room being the best version of myself I knew how to be. I wasn't trying to live into anything else or kind of trying to impress everybody else. And to other people, I was a little bit too loud. Or for me, you know, femininity was always a big deal because, you know, everyone was like, wow, she's not Twyla Paris. I'm like, no, I'm not.
For those who don't know, this is Twyla Paris, a favorite of evangelical church ladies of the 80s.
God is in control. We believe that his children will not be forsaken.
I think people were suspicious of me for a long time because I wasn't going around kind of looking for like my husband, and I wasn't talking about the future that I wanted to have as a wife. So I learned on the clock. I'd never done interviews before. Nobody trained me for that. All of a sudden you've got a microphone in your face or somebody's writing down what you said and you said that and you're like, oh, I did say that. Now it's in print for everybody to see, you know. That's kind of one of the side effects of siding with a smaller label. A lot of what an artist ends up being in the public sphere is really who they are. Like there's no big major money machine behind them trying to craft them so that you will be this purchasable product.
Like her musical heroes, Jennifer's guiding principle as an artist was authentic self-expression. She felt fulfilled when she connected with her audience on a human level.
The bigger goals of the CCM industry, influencing teens to stay within the evangelical fold, they didn't matter to Jennifer. But when Kansas was released, it did well. Really well. It went gold, selling 500,000 copies.
And that put her on the radar of evangelical leaders hoping to shape evangelical children into ideal evangelical adults. And one of the most efficient ways to do that was at massive youth conferences. And suddenly, Jennifer was getting booked at those and performing for
tens of thousands of teenagers, you know, being drawn into these arenas to be, you know, to be able to have this cavalcade of stars. So anywhere from, you know, authors and ministers and musicians is all rolled up into one, just massive conferences. And of course, you know, I was going and playing.
Just when I think I got it, it's gone.
One of the components inside of that was always the altar call. You know, every head bowed, every eye closed. And the culmination, right, of all of this messaging to try and get kids to commit their lives to Christ. And you always hear conversations inside of youth groups, don't have sex before you get married. It was pretty soft sell, but it was a consistent sell through any of my time in hanging out with youth groups. But it started to become much more targeted. And it was one day at hanging out at one of these major youth festivals, and I don't remember who did it at the time, but it was a pastor doing an evangelical, come to Jesus call, an altar call, and literally sex shamed the entire audience in order to get people to turn. Like, you're talking to a bunch of hormonal teenagers, and he says, if you've ever had an impure thought about another girl, if you've ever touched yourself for pleasure, if you girls have ever let somebody touch you, now is the time to let Jesus heal you, to let Jesus make you pure again. Don't be a disappointment to your parents. Don't be disappointing in the eyes of God. Tell me a kid in that 10,000 group thing that didn't have their hormones completely raging that this wasn't going to be an effective kind of bait and switch to a degree, like a false truth to kind of coerce a deeply meaningful spiritual response by targeting an idea of sexual shame. And I remember seeing that. And I was like, at the time, I'd been doing this a while. I had sex. I know what it's like to be in Christian culture and have everybody go, you've had sex outside of marriage. You're not as good as you could be. You're a second-class citizen. And I saw that happening. I was like, what am I doing here? Because I didn't want anybody to ever walk away from anything that I'd ever told them thinking anything less of themselves. Be a good person, trying to treat the other person across from you with respect and dignity, treat your body in the same way. We weren't having any of those conversations about ethics or morality or what good health might be or good mutual respect would be for another human being. It was just like this black and white. You're in if you're a virgin and you're out if you're not. And I was appalled.
So operating within the Christian music industry was getting uncomfortable for Jennifer because her goals didn't match up with the industry's. At the same time, her big following in the Midwest got her invited on an important tour outside the Christian industry.
We are here at the Lilith Fair Tour, and this is the concert answer to all those testosterone other concerts, like Lollapalooza and Horde and Roar. Well, this is over 60 women on different stages across the country, proving that women are doing it for themselves, and they can sell just as many records as the boys. We'll be catching up with women like Fiona Apple, Joan Osborne. We may even get the creator, Sarah McLachlan, to have a word or two with us.
For female artists, Lilith Fair was a huge affirmation that they could attract massive crowds without the good old boys of rock and roll. But as far as festivals went, Lilith Fair was seen as comparably tame. A lineup with lots of folksy,
acoustic performances,
earnest lyrics, patchouli in the air, But like you look at Woodstock 99, the same year that Jennifer Knapp went on Lilith Fair, it's like drunken riots,
mosh pits,
deafeningly loud electric guitars.
But despite all of that, for the CCM establishment, Lilith Fair was vaguely threatening. Lilith, known as the first wife of Adam, by the way, before Eve, was considered to be a demon by folks like Jerry Falwell. And the women attending the festival weren't being encouraged to be traditional wives and have traditional values like cooking and cleaning and submitting to their husbands.
I joined the Lilith Fair in like Michigan and Ohio. I was actually in my minivan driving on my way to a Lilith Fair gig and rolling through the radio dial then, because we weren't streaming or listening to satellite radio. It was all that was on the FM radio. I came across a Christian radio station and I'd heard Jennifer Knapp. So I stopped and I was like, what is going on? It was this talk radio thing that was going off their nut about how I was going to hell because I had joined up with the Lilith Fair tour. And so people were calling. It was this full-on hour of people on the radio calling in, having a conversation about me and about my state, about my witness, about, whether or not I was a lesbian because I had signed on to the Lilith Fair tour. It was clearly a sign that I was going to like other women. Turned out it made me gay.
So yeah, Lilith Fair made you gay. That's
yeah, I did. I wasn't gay before I went, but now after I went in 1999, that probably sealed the deal. About that time, the internet and bulletin boards and chat groups and blogs and things were starting to happen around that time, and then all of a sudden, you turn on the radio and there's this controversy swirling around. And people were calling me out and were concerned about whether or not I was seriously Christian, and probably, assuming that if I was hanging out at Lilith Fair that I was like hardcore hooked on drugs. And no, I called into the show. I was like, you may not realize this, but I can hear you. Like, you guys could have at least called me, asked me a couple of questions before you started, doing this, but I'm on my way and I'm fine, just so you know. You're not just talking about me. You're talking about the 14-year-old girl who's listening to this program, who has a pinup poster of me on their wall, who actually thinks that I'm really pretty. You're shaming her into this space, and I won't let you do that while I'm here. And I won't let you use me to do that, or, the hundreds of other kids that you're shaming around the country by trying to use me as an example for that. I won't let you do that. And that's one of the roles that I'm happy to take.
Coming up, how did Jennifer go from the topic du jour on talk radio to the biggest musical opportunity of her life?
I'm expecting them to hate me, like the animosity that people have toward Christianity. If there's any animosity to be had, I expect it to be directed toward me.
Rock that doesn't roll.
Hello, Rock That Doesn't Roll listeners. Andrew Gill here with a quick update on the status of this very podcast that you're listening to right now. Are they even still making new shows, you might ask yourself? Well, the answer is yes. Leah and I have been working on new episodes since January, but it is a little different now. Our PRX Templeton Foundation grant is done, so we are making the show independently, which means the only funding for our work comes from you, the listeners. But we do need more support than we currently have. We both have families, we both have kids, we both have other jobs, and so the time we have to dedicate to this project is quite scarce. Support from listeners like you makes it a justifiable investment of our time. You can do that at patreon.com/RTDR. You can find a link in the show notes there as well. If you can afford it, buy us 1 cup of coffee a month. If you can't afford it, keep listening. That is totally fine. Please tell a friend about it, though, because we also need to get a bigger listener base in order to attract advertisers. If you would like to advertise on the show, email us rtdrpod@gmail.com, and we can work that out. That would be wonderful. Again, we think this show is very important. It's an important aspect of understanding how we got to the point we're in now as a country and as humans who practice religions and enjoy pop culture. Again, patreon.com/RTDR is where you can support us monetarily. And if you can't afford it, tell a friend, tell 5 friends. Thanks so much for listening. Back to the show. Can't imagine rolling up to Lilith Fair having just listened to that conversation. It must have put you in such a weird headspace to be like,
oh my gosh.
Okay.
Well, so there's that side, right, from the Christian culture side of it. But then I'm rolling into Lilith Fair, where seriously, like, there's a nice cloud of pot smoke over the air, and I'm playing with these guys. There's literally like a 40-gallon ice chest full of beer in my green room, which never happened. I'm like, can I drink this? Like, what happens?
Right.
One of the first things I did when I rolled up to the very first Lilith Fair that I did was a press conference. So I'm sitting right next to, I'm between Sarah McLachlan and Sheryl Crow. I'm like, what is happening? I don't know. And I'm expecting them to hate me, like the animosity that people have toward Christianity. If there's any animosity to be had, I expect it to be directed toward me. I expected them to not take me seriously as a musician. I expected to be looked through, walked over, disrespected, not necessarily, and even myself, like as a musician, I'm going, I'm not on par with these guys. Like, I have no talent. And that's not
Imposter
the way.
syndrome set
Yeah.
in. Yeah.
And that's not the way I was treated at all. I was treated actually with a lot more respect than any CCM experience I'd ever had. Like I was walking away from the press conference and Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls had turned to me. She was in the press conference as well. She turns to me, she goes, "Hey, uh, at the end of our set, we're playing Closer to Fine, which of course is one of their major, major lifetime hits. They can never not play it. We're playing that, and we're inviting people to come up and sing the song with us. So if you need a lyric sheet," and I was like, like, yeah, right. "If you need a lyric sheet, we'll get you lyrics, but come up and sing the song with us." And I was like, okay. I hardly said 2 words, and I almost didn't go up, but I ended up sharing a microphone with Sarah McLachlan on stage with the Indigo Girls singing Closer to Fine.
The very song that Jennifer had been admonished for performing just a few years earlier in her baby Christian days, she was now singing it on stage with the most respected female singers in the mainstream music industry. In that moment, she was like CCM crossover Barbie.
I mean, who gets to do that, Like it was one of the most. I went from feeling like I would be excluded and vilified in this space for being, coming from a Christian environment. In fact, I was accepted, brought into, and loved. And it was ironic because it's not always the way I felt. Just driving on the way there, where my quote unquote own people were somewhat throwing me under the bus because I was going in and making relationships out in an environment you would think they would be very glad that I would be a witness to. But nonetheless.
Yeah. Isn't that the goal, right?
Yeah, that's such a great illustration of the tensions where, like, in the CCM world, where there's this idea that on the one hand, mainstream exposure is achievement on the part of all of them. But then on the other hand, it's a threat in part because it's like could be tainted in some kind of way. And so it's like there are 2 things going on at the same time, which for an artist, that seems tiring to me to have to speak in all those registers. I mean, I know you're good at it, but that would wear me out.
I didn't really know that at the time. Like I said, it was one of those things that you kind of learn on the fly. That's probably symptomatic of one of the reasons why I left CCM and why I became so fatigued living in that environment, persistently having to 100% project this idea of Christian culture and Christianity and become an avatar of what, symbolic of what that was supposed to be. When everything in my art, everything in my person, in my daily life, and my social relationships was about living normally and authentically, and not having my faith or the process of which I spiritually progress through the world be some kind of product.
Instead of packaging her life as a product, Jennifer went deeper into examining her faith, deconstructing the Christianity she'd embraced less than a decade before.
The third and the last record that I would eventually do with Goatee Records is a record called The Way I Am. And on that record, I was really trying to humanize Jesus, like this person who had lived a life, who'd walked on an earth, who had suffered persecution, who had been a blessing to other people, who had wisdom to share, all these kinds of things. And I went into that humanity. I kind of took out all of the supernatural components, and I'm like, what if we just take a second and look at this story? As I start to talk about that out in the spaces, in these big rooms, and every time I would talk about that in these environments, I would just get people just looking at me like I'd said something heretical or didn't understand what I was saying at all. It just was crickets. And it just became so disappointing to me to be able to say something that I was really wanting to talk about in my faith and in my music, as the medium with which I had these conversations. And to put that out into the world and to have a whole room look back to me and say, play Ya Ya Ding Dong. Play your greatest hits. Play the song that's like syrupy sweet. The room that I was in wasn't ready to come with me. It became very difficult. And I think those experiences really got me, bitter and angry and fatigued to the point where I just I don't want to do this anymore. There's sometimes I think, we get so angry and we get so upset that we're not a useful person in a conversation anymore. And that's really the way I felt at the end of my CCM career. I had to have a little bit of faith that if I was ever going to have that conversation, I didn't know what it was going to be in the future. So I needed to take some time out to be able to figure out what that might be.
In 2002, Jennifer moved to Australia. In 2004, she announced she was taking a break from music. Her label put out a live album and a greatest hits collection to keep her fans happy. But there was nothing new from Jennifer herself for years. Then, in 2009, Knapp revealed she was starting to write music again. And her CCM fans rejoiced.
A year later in 2010, however, Jennifer had big news. She gave simultaneous interviews with Christianity Today, Reuters, and The Advocate. In the interview, Jennifer announced that she'd been in a relationship with a woman, now her wife, since 2002. In 1999, when she played Lilith Fair and heard the talk radio discussion about her sexual orientation, she didn't identify as gay. But now, Jennifer knew the strict boundaries around sexuality and sexual orientation that were the norm in CCM would mean the end of her faith-based music career. In 2010, after the interview, she released a new album, Letting Go. It was not marketed to Christian radio.
I'll be honest, even when I came back in 2010, I was really anticipating never having a conversation in a Christian context in public ever again. I was super excited about that. But what I didn't know when I came back is so many other people in that same 7 years that I was gone was also doing their own work. That there really were serious people out there who were very serious about their faith tradition, were just as perplexed by Christian culture and all its propaganda qualities, still found something genuine, unique, and incredibly important to them underneath of that. Strangely enough, I think I have way more of a ministry now, or way more service to my faith in a secular context than I ever had at the time. Which is to say, I'm not trying to sell people on Jesus, which I never have been, but I'm very, I definitely have a conversation that I can have about it when it's appropriate and when people want to have that conversation back with me. And I think that's been a lovely balance.
I know you're re-recording Kansas, and I just wondered if you could talk about how you came to decide to do that.
I thought it would be really interesting to kind of go back and visibly reclaim it in some ways, and particularly for the LGBTQ community, because it says, this is a record made by a gay person. This is a faith-based record made by a gay person, because I didn't see myself that way at the time. But people coming to shows, telling me a story about a song like Undo Me, which is on the Kansas record, or Martyrs and Thieves, which is a song that I famously didn't play for the first time in probably 8 or 9 years until a really drunken crowd of lesbians in a lesbian bar in Philadelphia demanded that I play it. Otherwise, I was afraid of violence.
It is Philadelphia after all.
It is Philly, and there's a bunch of there was a lot of drunk lesbians around demanding that I play that song, and I didn't want to play it. And they made me and course corrected me right then.
Well, I've never been much for bearing a soul in the presence of any man. I'd rather keep to myself, all safe and secure in the arms of a sinner I am.
So I had to kind of somewhat go through a personal process of reconciling what my relationship was with these songs. It turned out to be a gift from my community back to me of songs that I had not been familiar with. And so I went back and started playing them. And since 2010, I've kind of played one or two of these songs. But with this 25-year anniversary, I was like, I need to celebrate that concept. Yes, there are things that the church does wrong. Yes, there are odd ways that religion sometimes ends up playing out in our lives. Odd, painful, traumatic, terrible. But underneath of that is something authentic that we're actually still looking for. And I don't always know how to name it, but it is something deeply spiritual. And if it is God with a capital G, so be it. I don't want to name it I just loathe to name it for anybody else. But the act of going and re-recording that record is that process for me. It's being able to gift it back and say, hey, you've believed in it a long time. And if you're not there right now, you can have it back.
With the exact same songs that were released back in 1998, Jennifer is still working on the same project she started back then, to carve out a space for women to be their full selves in deeply spiritual ways. Only now, she better understands exactly what she's trying to do and why.
I liberate this record for you the same way that you liberated it for me. I feel like the fans liberated this record long before I did. I honestly feel like re-recording is just a demonstration of that.
After our interview, Jennifer's Kansas 25 Kickstarter was fully funded, so vinyl should be coming soon. You can check jenniferknapp.com for more information.
Next time on Rock That Doesn't Roll,
I just couldn't get into the choir music at all. I couldn't get into it. So I just started writing raps about my new experience.
the holy side of hip-hop.
If you have a story to share or thoughts on this episode, please call our hotline. You can call anytime, 629-777-6336.
To be the first to hear our episodes and for full access to our bonus episodes, join us on Patreon, patreon.com/RTDR.
Find us on Substack and Instagram by searching Rock That Doesn't Roll. And of course, you should give us a rating and review on whatever podcast app you're using to listen right now.
Rock That Doesn't Roll is a Big Questions project from PRX with funding from the John Templeton Foundation. It's produced by us with help from Morgan Flannery and Emmanuel Desarme.
Jocelyn Gonzalez, Neil Katcher, and Dave Nadelberg edit the show. Michael Rayfield mixes it.
Our original score is by Jim Cooper of Infomercial USA. Courtney Florentine provides production oversight. I'm Leah Payne.
And I'm Andrew Gill. Remember, rock all you want, but be careful where you roll.
From PRX.